Great. So the first thing, Rosemary, is what's happening on Monday the 7th. Is it Monday the 17th of April, the launch?
It is Monday. It is Monday, the 17th of April. It's the launch of a new project called Living with the Climate Crisis, which I've been involved with as one of the main authors. And so I'm a psychotherapist and I've been involved in the climate movement for about 20 years. And my interest has always been in what my profession can bring to the movement that it doesn't otherwise have. And primarily, that's paying attention to how people feel when they engage with what is actually happening to the climate. Because in general, people's experiences range from through all kinds of feelings: anger, fear, desperation, despair, shock, grief. You can go on, you can name a whole gamut of emotion. And very often, when you're caught up in the urgency of action, those emotions get swept to one side. They go a bit under the carpet, and it maybe doesn't feel possible to pay attention to them. And so, what this project is doing is it's promoting the establishment of groups led by skilled facilitators where people can take the time to do three things. And the first is to look at what they're feeling and to speak about the feelings that they're having and to try to find some resolution, some kind of resting place out of the grief and the despair and the shock and all of the rest of it. A great range of feelings, I think. The second is to learn a bit more about what is possible to do across a very broad spectrum of action. And there's a focus partly on how to communicate better. That's a big chunk of it around climate, whether you're speaking to your family and your close friends or whether you're speaking to a public meeting. And the third bit of it is this sense of looking at the climate movement as an ecosystem, which requires all kinds of different people to be in it and all kinds of different activities to be going on in it. And so that third part of these groups is looking at what is it that you can do that is going to be sustainable, that you're going to be able to be in for the long term. And that's likely to be a mix of different things, and it's likely to change as time goes on. And so the groups are looking at those kinds of issues, and our hope is that people will be able to come to these and use them in the communities that they're already part of. We want this to be a locally based activity rather than an online one, although obviously we're holding the launch online because we reach more people that way. So that's essentially what the project's about.
Thank you. And it emerged or is a continuation of work that I know that you've been doing since 2007 with Carbon Conversations. So, how does this work reflect on the successes and failures of Carbon Conversations? And what does it do that Carbon Conversations didn't or couldn't do?
In 2007, when we started the Carbon Conversations project, we were in the middle of a period of increased government commitment to action on climate change. The government was preparing the climate change bill, which became the Climate Change Act. There was quite a lot of money around in local authorities and coming from government sources to promote community activity about climate change. And although, like all activists, I saw what the government was doing as inadequate, it was there. And it felt like the role for a community organisation was to work with our local communities and get people to understand the basics of what life needed to look like in a much lower carbon society and to help people take the steps in that direction that they could in their own lives. So the Carbon Conversations Project brought people together to talk about the emotions associated with these major changes that we hoped were coming, and to start acting. And we created materials that could be used by just about anybody with a short bit of training. And those groups were taken up nationally and then internationally as a model of how to bring people together in communities. But so much has changed since then, and so much needs to change, because we have seen, since the failure of the Copenhagen negotiations in 2009 and the advent of a Conservative government, such backtracking on climate issues that people coming to the climate movement now are facing different issues from those that were being faced then. Some issues are the same, some are more intense. And so we've been realizing for a time that the Carbon Conversations Project had really run its course. It was it'd been a good thing in its time, but the materials were out of date. They weren't dealing with the issues that were troubling people. And so we began to talk about what we could do instead. And in the new project, we've drawn together material from different workshops that we've run over the years, and into a kind of coherent whole that addresses these three questions I was talking about earlier. How do we cope with the feelings? How do we talk about this very difficult issue? How do we make our action sustainable? And that's what I came together to do with Rebecca Nestor, who's been around in the climate movement for a long time herself, mostly in community action, and is an organizational consultant, and with Daniela Fernandez Cathral, who is a community psychologist in quite radical ways in communities.
Sorry,
And
Rosemary.
so out of that has...
Hello, Rosemary.
Yes, hello? Can
Hello.
you
The
hear me?
sound dropped. Yes, the sound dropped out a bit just as you were talking about Daniela Fernandez Cathedral. So if you could explain a bit about who she is.
Yes. So my third colleague is Daniela Fernandez Cathedral, who is a community psychologist with a lot of experience of working psychologically in the community, away from the consulting room, and engaging diverse groups in community action. So it's a shift of emphasis away from the carbon reduction aspect of climate issues, and into something which has much more focus on the well-being of activists and their capacities to continue to deliver in very difficult circumstances.
Thank you. So we've talked about the past. Let's talk about the future. Let's say it's Monday or Tuesday, the 17th of April. I'm never quite sure which way the days go. 2024, and it's a year after the launch of Living with Climate. What's changed? Who's been using the materials? And what sort of feedback have you been getting about the materials? And how have you responded to that feedback?
I'm hoping that there will be groups running in a number of places in the UK. We know that we've got groups starting in the places where Daniela and myself and Rebecca are based. We've also got some people who we know are going to be using it in Wales, and we're hoping to see gradually more people using it in different places. We're also, over this coming year, we're going to be offering some more in-depth introductory workshops, which will be done online for people who wish to facilitate the groups. We're doing one for some people in Canada shortly, and we've got another one for people in the UK coming up in April. And we anticipate doing more of those. We will be offering monthly support sessions for people using the materials, which will also take place online. We're planning on a meeting next September, which we hope will be a face-to-face meeting where people who have been beginning to use it can come together to share experiences. We're hoping that people will be taking the materials and using them in a lot of different ways. We're quite explicit that we want people to adapt what we are suggesting to their particular circumstances and the audiences that they're working with. And it's very important to us to acknowledge that these materials have come out of our experience, and for some groups, these may be a starting point, not an end point. That people may take one part of what we've suggested and not another. And we're hoping that people who come from the psychological professions and associated professions, anybody really who's got good facilitation skills, will feel that this is something which they can do as a contribution to the climate movement. So we're hoping to see groups happening, we're hoping to see people being supported, and that support work is all being done through the Climate Psychology Alliance, which is sponsoring and supporting the project. And we're hoping that it will take on a life of its own